Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 1 of 3 in this rookie face-off tournament that the Sharks are participating in, and their first matchup was against the Anaheim Ducks. Now, of course, the Sharks ended up losing here tonight, 8-4 to the Anaheim Ducks, but I do need to clarify something. First of all, obviously, the score does not matter because this rookie tournament does not matter in any sort of sense at all. There's not really any stakes for the teams as a whole. There are stakes for the players, which is why it still ends up being a pretty competitive set of games because these players are all vying for a potential spot at the NHL level, if not, a decent spot at the AHL level or whatever junior team they might end up going back to. So there are obviously stakes to this game for each particular player, but for the team as a whole, it doesn't particularly matter. Another thing to also toss out is the fact that when it comes to an NHL level game, there is a certain level of parity because all of the players have played together for a very long time, and so a lot of teams can sort of rise to a greater than the sum of their parts type of level. However, in these rookie face-off, all of these rookie players have, or most of the rookie players at the very least, have not really played together all that much. So besides maybe like some development camp games here or there, like we saw with the Sharks and the practices that went on prior to this rookie face-off, for the past couple of days, these players have not really seen much of each other. And so while at the NHL level, the game is much more played on the ice than it is on paper, in this rookie face-off, it's likely leaning more towards being played on paper than it is on the ice. It's kind of the more skilled team will usually win. And when it comes to the Anaheim Ducks, they're just going to have a more skilled team because they have been, sucking for longer than the Sharks to actually be able to draft some really solid players. They had 9th overall from 2019 Trevor Zegras, 6th overall from 2020 Jamie Drysdale, as well as the 3rd overall pick from just this past year's draft in McTavish. The Sharks, and then also, I should mention, 2 other first-round picks on that roster as well. For the Sharks, they had 3 first-round picks, if I'm not mistaken. The first obviously being Eklund at 7th overall this past season, but the other 2 were Merkley at 20-something overall, as well as Weisblatt at the final pick in the first round of the 2020 draft. So the Ducks clearly with the more skilled team, and I would say it absolutely showed here tonight. The Ducks kind of just ran over the Sharks in most of this game. But as I said, it doesn't particularly matter. What really matters is to pay attention to each specific player on the San Jose Sharks, and I will be outlining 6 of them here tonight. And at the top of this list, you would think it would end up being William Eklund. Of course, Eklund had most of the eyes on him because he is the Sharks' top prospect, so it was going to be a big question how he would look here in this first game of the rookie tournament. People were excited to watch him, but I'm actually going to have him second here because at the top of this list, I could not ignore the outstanding play of Ryan Merkley in this game. He was by far the best Sharks player here tonight, and it was not even close at all. Most people, sometimes they'll say by far, but they'll be exaggerating. If Merkley was a 10 tonight, the next closest Sharks player was maybe a 6, and that is a big maybe. Almost everybody else was average at best, while Merkley was just far and away superior to every other Sharks player. Almost every single shift he came onto the ice, he actually managed to make something happen offensively, which in a game where the Sharks were pretty much run over in general by the Anaheim Ducks is even more impressive, right? Because when your team is doing very, very well, it's easy to be able to accumulate a couple of points here or there, but especially when the team is not doing well, to be able to stand out in a positive way is even that much more impressive, and Merkley did exactly that. There were still a couple of small errors defensively, which was what you might expect from a player like Merkley, but while, at the development camp I mentioned that those defensive errors were not necessarily worth it for the not that great offensive game that he brought in that game, here tonight, the offense far outweighed the small issues defensively that Merkley actually ended up having, and he was just a driving force for the San Jose Sharks in this rookie face-off game. So his stock shot up immensely with his performance, and it'll be interesting to see how the last 2 games in this rookie face-off tournament actually go for number 6. Next, we will be talking about Eklund. As I said, he was the player with the most eyes on him coming into this game, and as I mentioned a bit in my Merkley talking, In my Merkley points, I mentioned how most of the other Sharks players were kind of average at best, and Eklund really fits into that. There were a couple of moments where Eklund showed off some real elite talent. There was this one play where he comes driving down the wing, he goes for some sort of spinorama move, and then the puck just barely rolls off of his stick. That, made you kind of jump out of your seat because it was a very, very nice play. But a lot of the times Eklund, I found he was kind of chasing the puck around. A very famous cliche that people will say about sometimes these younger players, or just really any player who's doing really well at the NHL level, is to say, well, the puck seems to just follow them around. But in tonight's case, it didn't really follow Eklund around. More so, he was trying to follow the puck around and didn't have much luck actually being able to get it back. So, this isn't the end of the world. This isn't a disaster. The Sharks did not pick a bust in this past draft. It was just, a small, not so great game from William Eklund. There were still moments that obviously make you say that this player certainly has a ton of skill. So while this game makes you think he might be due for that 1 year of extra development, either, overseas or potentially at the AHL, whatever he decides to do, he probably isn't fully ready for NHL gameplay coming up this season. That could definitely change over the last couple of games of this rookie faceoff and into training camp and the preseason. This was only a single game and players are allowed to have off games, but it is the general impression to get from him from this one here tonight. Next, I will be talking about defender Santeri Hataka, a fourth-round pick from a couple of years ago. When I also was talking about Merkley, I mentioned how Merkley, if he was a 10, the next closest player was a 6. Hataka was likely that next closest player. Hataka was actually the defensive partner for Merkley here tonight, and I thought was actually rather impressive. While Merkley was a driving force offensively very consistently, Hataka was probably the best defender for the Sharks defensively. Honestly, the defense for the Sharks was extremely spotty here tonight. A lot of players had a lot of issues, but Hataka was one of them who I thought was at least relatively solid. He made a couple of very nice defensive plays. I also thought at the blue line he made some very nice pinches and showed off some very good decision making. There were times where you thought maybe he could have gotten to a puck down the wall, but he decided to stand back, and it was a smart defensive choice. But there were also times where he actually made the correct choice to pinch in and help keep the puck alive in the offensive zone. So Hataka, kind of an under the radar prospect for the San Jose Sharks, but whenever you do hear about him as being a Finnish player, he played with the World Juniors a couple of times with Finland. Whenever you do hear about him, it's always good things, and you never know what could be coming with Santeri Hataka over these next couple of years in the Sharks system. Next, I'll be talking about Jasper Weatherby. Was actually on a line here tonight with William Eklund and was actually a decent player, I would say. Probably one of the better players for the San Jose Sharks. As I said, for Hataka, he was probably a 6. Weatherby maybe right there with him, maybe a small step below him at a 5. And Weatherby is actually a very interesting player because the Sharks had recently signed him to the entry-level deal. He was going to forego his final year in college for this upcoming season, and he seems to have a real shot at actually being able to make it to the NHL in this upcoming year. The Sharks have a bit of a logjam at forward. They have multiple players vying for just a few spots in the Sharks' bottom 6, and Weatherby is seemingly in line to be one of those players. He actually scored a goal here tonight on a tip-in shot from Ryan Merkley on the power play. Really, the power play was the big moment where the Sharks actually looked like a cohesive unit. Their power play was superb here tonight. At even strength, not so much, but at the very least, the power play had something going for it. And so Weatherby was a decent part of that, and it'll be interesting to see if he does end up making an impact at the NHL level. Next, I will be talking about Artemis Kniazev, as he was a player who obviously had the most hype about him after the development camp. I said he was the best player in that development camp game that the Sharks played a few weeks ago. But here tonight, Kniazev didn't really make much of an impact at all. There was not really much doing offensively, and his defensive game left a lot to be desired as well. He definitely did not really stick out in a good way. So I, of course, made the bold prediction that Kniazev might actually end up playing a good chunk of games for this upcoming season, but maybe this is why I shouldn't have made a bold prediction just based on a development camp game that the Sharks played between their own prospects, because this game was definitely a massive step forward after the massive step back after the large step forward he took those few weeks ago. And finally, I'll be talking about the goaltender for the San Jose Sharks here tonight, Zachary Emond. Not necessarily a goaltender who has a lot of hope and, a huge future with the San Jose Sharks, but he is here at this rookie face-off to play at least a game or two, and here tonight he didn't look particularly good at all. Obviously, the Ducks were kind of just running circles around the San Jose Sharks a lot, so there were definitely 3-4 goals that really weren't the fault of Emond, but there were also a couple he definitely could have had, and he looked shaky throughout most of this game. I mean, even in a game where your team is getting outplayed, to let in 8 goals, there is definitely some blame that has to go to the goaltender in addition to the defenseman. And so we'll likely see the Sharks' other goaltender, I believe it is Ben Gaudreau, drafted in this past draft, coming up into the following game on Sunday. But that will do it for this review. In terms of where to expect the San Jose Sharks, luckily their next 2 games are against the Golden Knights and the Colorado Avalanche. Obviously, I mentioned that earlier on that the Ducks had a very, very strong team on paper because they've been rebuilding for a few years now. The Golden Knights and the Avalanche, on the other hand, have not been rebuilding for the past couple of years, so their prospect pools are likely a bit more shallow and more in line with what the Sharks have to offer, so hopefully there will be a couple more competitive games to come on Sunday and Monday. Class dismissed.